morning. How are you guys? Excited to be here. Excited for the day ahead. Very honored to be introducing Davinita Mosby-Tyler, our keynote speaker. Very honored to be able to say a few words about her accomplishments and very excited to hear what she has to say. So Dr. Davinita Mosby-Tyler is the founder of and the chief catalyst, which I love, of the Equity Project, and someone who's been a real driving force for health equity in Colorado for literal decades. 36 plus years she's been doing this work and specializing in leadership, equity, diversity, cultural responsiveness, inclusiveness, strategies, and training programs. And I am sure has worked with many of you sitting in this room, if not all of you. The list of organizations that she's helped think about equity and driving equity is incredibly long. Just a few of them are the University of Colorado Hospital, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, Kaiser Permanente. Give me one second. It's a long list. The Boulder County AIDS Project, Denver Police Department, Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, the Colorado Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the Denver Sheriff's Department, the Community Resource Center, and many, many more. A huge and diverse list of organizations that she's been able to really help and bring to the next level. Prior to founding the Equity Project, Dr. Mosby-Tyler served as the Senior Vice President of Human Resources and the Chief Inclusion Officer for Children's Hospital of Colorado. She's also the former Executive Director of the Office of Human Resources for the City and County of Denver. And in both roles, she made history as the first African-American woman to hold these positions. It's incredible. During the past 36 plus years of working in the field, Dr. Mosby-Tyler has been recognized for excellence in leadership in dozens of times, including as Colorado 9 News Leader of the Year. And she's been recognized nationally for her work in nonprofit, community, government, and corporate organizations. The Equity Project, which she heads now as its chief catalyst and founder, is a consulting firm that supports organizations and communities developing diversity, equity, inclusion strategies. She started the firm in an effort to bridge health equity gaps in society. Today, the Equity Project brings transformative work to organizations across the globe, empowering people to develop actionable strategies to help organizations advance their equity efforts. There is no one better suited to kick off today's agenda. Join me in welcoming Dr. Davinita Mosby-Tyler to the stage.
Thank you. Everybody knows I can't be contained by this podium, so I shall move around. How are you doing this morning? I'm a little facetious in asking you that question because I want you to get used to asking that question when you enter rooms and in your workplaces and in your communities, because the fact of the matter is people aren't doing okay right now. It's a hard time in history, and many of you have been in hard times in history before, and yet we're in another one, and it's really okay to say, I'm okay or I'm not okay. And so let us get used to asking the question before we proceed with the work, because there is nothing normal about what's happening in the work right now. So I'm going to ask you again. How are you doing this morning? Okay, you see? Yeah, it's okay. You are allowed, we collectively are allowed, and this is not like a political statement I'm making here. This is a time in history kind of a statement. You are allowed to feel what you feel and to go through the process of it. What I don't want you to do is get so buried in the negative of it that we miss some of the bright lights, and that's really what I want to talk about today. Let me see if I can get this to go. What I want to get you to think about is something that I learned almost 8 years ago when I was at Children's Hospital Colorado. It's a wonderful organization with a lot of big things happening in it. And when big things are happening in a system, the risk that you run is that you only pay attention to the big, obvious, loud things that you see and you sometimes miss the subtleties of what's actually happening in the system. I think the same thing holds true when we think about health equity or examining health disparities or any other type of marginalization or oppression, that oftentimes what we see and pay attention to are the biggest, loudest, most obvious things, and we don't notice the subtleties. So if I can tell you what I'm learning across the country, not just Colorado, but across the country, is we have to do a better job in building our capacity for noticing. Noticing is a core competency. And you probably are saying, that can't be a core competency, but I want you to look back on our history about how many times we missed the things that weren't so obvious. So building your capacity for noticing means that you're actually able to discern loud versus subtle. So I want you to think about this for a minute. This is the part where I'm going to ask you to talk. What are you noticing in our world, in your organizations, in your communities that's loud to you? Loud, prominent, big, obvious, making a lot of noise. What's loud to you right now? This is the part where you talk. What's loud to you? Chaos. Lack of affordable housing's loud. What else is loud to you? Division is loud. The rise in uninsured people, we thought we'd handled that, I heard. And so we didn't. Loud. Loud. Okay, so those are loud things, and each of you can probably think of a million loud things. Now, the question is, what are you noticing that's subtle, quiet, whisper, silent? What are you noticing that's subtle right now? Partnerships. Did somebody say partnerships? Partnerships. Great. What else is subtle? This is a little harder. People trying. Yes, people trying. Subtle. Thank you. What else is subtle to you right now? What did you say? Shifting is subtle, is a subtlety. So I want you to thank you for that. I want you to think about this because the question around subtlety is harder than the question around loud. And that's on purpose. It's because our brains are wired to look at the things that are loud and obvious and big. I want to say something about the subtleties, though. The subtleties is where the truth resides. It's where the answers reside. It's where the solutions reside, typically in the subtleties. They oftentimes will show up in what hasn't been said yet. So your ability to have the competencies to pay attention to the subtleties is a part of what we need in the body of work we call health equity. You have to be paying attention to the things that aren't being said too. And I'll get to some of those. So I thought I would spend a minute just giving you just a little bit of history about the Equity Project. Like, I've had these wonderful jobs. Some of you have been with me along the journey of the places that I've worked, and I have no complaints about the places that I've been. What an honor everywhere I've been. But in 2016, I started seeing something that looks really similar to what I'm seeing right now, and that is we, the human beings in the United States of America, were getting polarized, meaning we were losing our ability to be in relationship with one another for all kinds of reasons, but it was happening right before my eyes. And so I had to make the biggest decision. I say had to because I couldn't even sleep at night. I had to make the biggest decision I've made in my entire life, and that was to leave Children's Hospital Colorado to go and start this new thing called the Equity Project. And it wasn't that I thought I was an expert on the issue of equity, inclusion, and diversity. It was that I wanted to do it in a different way, this work of equity, diversity, and inclusion. I wanted us to relax the stereotypes. I wanted us to take the over-engineered nature of equity, diversity, and inclusion work out. I wanted to simplify it. I wanted it to become a consciousness and not a logic model. I wanted all of those things to happen. I wanted to create spaces, I call spaces filled with grace, where people could be in tension around topics, but not have to feel like they were being judged and critiqued in the process. So that's what started the Equity Project for me. I tell you that because I think that is also the catalyst for the places that I've been. But I think it's important for you to understand the places that you've been in this work, the history, your equity, diversity, and inclusion history, in order to know what you're supposed to even do with it. So we've been in this cycle as long as I've been alive, and we've gone round and round in circles. I don't mean that in a negative way, but round and round in circles, meaning we've iterated what we're talking about. We say EDI, EID, whatever your acronym is. But the fact of the matter is there's been an evolution of the words. And when you say the words, I want you to know what you're saying so you're not disappointed when the outcomes that you want aren't coming to life. I find, especially in Colorado, that we're using acronyms to describe things that are not the acronym. Let me say that again. We're using acronyms to describe things that are not the acronym. So we say health equity, but we're actually doing diversity work, which is not the same thing as equity work. And so I don't mean to wordsmith here. What I want us to do is to settle in on what we're actually working on. So evolutionary model here that just tells you the decades that we were actively in the work, where the work was grounded, all the way from the equality movements of the 60s and 70s to the diversity movement of the 70s and 80s. We've been in this sort of cycle. It is not a bad word for you to simply say, this is the element that we're going to work on. If you're going to work on equity, make sure that you know the definition of equity and that the things that you're doing are actually that. Equity work is not just, I hire 5 more black people. Congratulations, you hire 5 more black people. But that isn't the definition of equity all by itself. You're on the road to something, but it is not the full complement of what equity is all about. And so in my work at the Equity Project, as much as this seems really simplified, the model that you're looking at right now, the evolution, we use it a lot because we help organizations to decide what it is they're actually working on. They might say we want to have equity and health equity as the guiding star or guiding light. But when we segment what they're doing in their work plans, it usually falls in 1 or 2 of these categories at a time. A quick example I'll give you here. Almost every organization that I've worked with in Colorado would say, we are inclusive. And this is a subtlety for me when people say they're inclusive, because the subtlety for me is, says who? Which is the question we should be asking. If you believe that you are an inclusive organization, who gets to confirm or affirm that? You? So here's the key. The key is you have to have a balancing or a checkpoint to what inclusiveness means. And you typically can get that out of assessing for belonging. When you say we're an inclusive organization, your community and your workplace should say absolutely or no way. So the affirmation, confirmation comes from what you do in your belonging strategies. They go together. So as much as you can pull these apart, the better. And this is the evolution that we've been on that has caused some discourse because we're exhausted from that. So I get to hear things like, when are we ever going to finish? Never. We already did that. Right. It's iterative work that means, and it's a cycle, and you'll go back. You'll do equity work, and then there's something else that you'll be working on that calls for you to be focused on diversity. It just works like that. So if you're looking for something that's longitudinal in a checklist and we're done, wrong meeting, wrong topic, wrong category. It doesn't work like that. But I want you to know that. People are really struggling with that. The other thing I can tell you about what I'm seeing, especially in Colorado, is we have narrative in Colorado about what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing, which just about makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. We like to prescribe where people ought to be in the journey of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and that sometimes is not something that needs to be established by big systems. People, the human beings in this room, each are on a different journey in the work. But the organization that you work in could be on an entirely different journey. And we have to admit that both of those can be true. That your organization can be on a big community journey or a statewide journey, but the people sitting at the tables could be in totally different parts of the journey. Please, please, please make that okay for yourself. So this model just shows you what parts of the journey can look like. I call it learn it, live it, and lead it. Learn it is when you are just learning workshops and books and podcasts and all of the things that you do to stay on top of this ever-changing topic of equity, inclusion, and diversity. It's okay to be in there, although there is rhetoric that says you need to get out of there and go do something. That part's true. Learning doesn't mean you aren't doing something, but it does mean that you're really grounded in that. I'm very grounded in the learn it phase. Every time I've learned something, I go and do something with it, and then I go back to learning something else. That's how it moves. That's why it's concentric circles. So not a linear process, not a math equation. The live it part is the behavior change part, and we work with a lot of organizations across Colorado, mostly on the live it piece, is how do you translate what you're learning into how you changed, how your organization is going to operate differently. And we help organizations build their equity blueprints and all kinds of things to help manifest what it looks like to be and live it. And then lead it really is about the equity piece. It's the construction work. It's you've learned it, your behavior has changed, so you're moving differently, and now what is your system doing? What's your system look like? What are the system changes? You know, there are a lot of organizations in Colorado that have moved through all three of these, and they just keep moving, and they make changes in their organization all of the time. What I see, though, is the deficit is we don't really document when we're making the changes, and so we assume we're not doing anything, and so does the rest of the state. So be kind to yourselves in how you document when you're doing equity work. In particular, when you're doing equity work, document it. What does it look like? And it might not mean that you've changed an entire system, but you've changed a little bit in the system to make a difference. I think about in my own organization, we're a small organization. There's 7 of us. But one of the things that we changed was the PTO policy. I felt like it was a barrier. It was administratively just too complicated for such a small team. And it just didn't work well. And I've been in PTO processes my whole career, and I've always thought they don't work all that well. What would it look like if you just trusted your people, is what I said. Novel concept. And so I decided we'd get rid of PTO and go to trusted time off. You just take the time off when you need the time off. You just make sure everybody's not gone at the same time, and you just take it. And so we've been in trusted time off for 2 years now. And I have noticed some very different things about the temperament, the stress levels, the way people move inside of my organization. And we've been working with other organizations, smaller ones right now, to see if they could do the same thing. And what a difference does it really make, especially when you start saying things like we're inclusive. People that are sitting in trusted time off models also say, I feel connected. That's the belonging piece. And so we are able to affirm that more easily. So those are just some of the examples. But let me tell you where we're spending a lot of time, especially in Colorado with the clients that we're working with. Nationally, we're working with 400 distinct clients. We have a lot of clients that we're working with across the country. Some are in, I don't know, kind of everything looks like a red state now, but a lot of work before the election in red states. And so the first thing I want to tell you is there's rhetoric that would have us to believe that people in predominantly white, conservative, rural communities don't want to hear about any of this and don't want to do the work. And I want to emphatically tell you that that is not true in our experiences. We actually spend a lot of time in white, conservative, rural America, a lot, all over the country. And I would have to say to you that some of the strongest work that I've been involved in has happened in those communities that we have said don't want to do this and don't want to hear this. So please don't write communities off. Please do understand, though, that the rhetoric can kill the will to do things. So be kind to the whole state and be kind to the whole country about the willingness to do the work. Some of it has to do with what I want to share with you real quick, and that it's these mental models. We use mental models a lot in our work at the Equity Project because we want people to understand the way that people think so that they know what they're designing for. So it keeps you from stereotyping this and that, and it broadens the way that you should be thinking about how people might be thinking about this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I just want to share the mental models with you because our clients build their processes around these mental models. So remember, it's not a label for people, it's how people think, including you. We all think in all of these mental models. It just depends on what's happening. So the first one, you know this one, it's called active opposition. Active opposition is you just are against this whole DE&I nonsense. Like, I don't want to talk about it, it's bad. And we hear it at the national level, but you'll hear it at local levels too. No matter what you say and how you articulate it, there are people in this mental model that don't want to hear it. They're not going to work with you. They will work against it. That's just what it is. Now, what I want you to do is not just think about other people that are in this mental model. I actually want you to think about when you're in this mental model. All of us are. It just depends on what you're talking about. But to be thinking about how you've seen active opposition show up and about what. That's the important key, about what. Quick story. I did some work in Grand Junction, Colorado. I was asked by a very powerful person down there if I would come down and talk to a group of young men that were causing trouble. Now, that sentence doesn't sound good, does it? It's like, did you really mean to call me? So they did. They're causing trouble all over the place. And I said, what kind of trouble? And they said, well, it's racist stuff. And I said, and you called me? Yes, because we think you can talk to them. And so off to Grand Junction I went. Walked in a room, 20 young white guys, 20 years old, 19 years old. They were really young, with their arms crossed when I walked in the room. Off to a great start. I walked in the room, and I said, guys, I won't be here long. I just have one question for you. Why do you hate me? And so it was silence, like it is right now, for a minute. And then all of a sudden, the room just erupted in the most hateful stuff, racist stuff I'd ever heard in my life. And it just went, just rolling through the room. And so I stood in front of them, just like I am with you right now, let them go for a minute. And then I said, guys, you missed my question. I said, why do you hate me? And so one of the guys reared back in his chair and he said, we don't hate you because you're not even like the rest of them. So I pretended like I was pondering. And I looked at him and I said, I get it, because you're not like the rest of them either. I said, I don't know any white people like you. I don't know any white people that say the stuff that you just said. I don't know any white people that act like this. I don't know any white people that march through communities wreaking havoc. You're not like the rest of them either. And there sat in that subtlety the breakthrough. It opened up a conversation. Because for some of those young men, it was the first time that they'd ever heard that not everybody acts like them. And they needed to hear that. And they needed to hear it from me. So I want you to know that was an example of active opposition. And you have a choice there. You can do nothing because it's so extreme, which that was. Like the black lady that walks in the room with the 20 white nationalists, that's pretty extreme. Except I did. I came face to face with active opposition, and you're going to be in that position at some point where you will have to come face to face with active opposition, or in the design of what you're doing, you're going to totally write them off. And that's your choice. That's the decision that we have to make. But it is a mental model for you to be thinking about. This one is too. It's called passive unawareness. Now, these are people in a mental model that we talk about. We talk about them all of the time because we don't believe them. These are people that don't have knowledge about what we're even talking about. We have a room full of really bright people. Somebody in this room is sitting in passive unawareness, believe it or not, meaning you really just don't understand the depths of what we're talking about. You don't understand the severity of it, maybe even, or the lived experiences of it when we say inequities or disparities. There's always someone in that mental model where they just don't know, and they're not faking it. This is not fake don't know. This is I don't understand this, or I don't know, I don't have enough knowledge. So I'm going to tell you, in this mental model, we also have a responsibility, and so I help a lot of organizations build their strategies around heavy passive unawareness in their communities or in their organizations. Sometimes this is in rural parts of states where there's just unawareness about what we're talking about. And so for those organizations that are sitting in that position, the fact that you're noticing that you have passive unawareness where people just don't know, they're not educated about what you're talking about, it's good. It is a good sign that you're going to do something about that and not just write people off as ignorant, because that's what we've done. Now this one sounds just like the last one. The last one was passive unawareness. This one's passive awareness. Passive awareness is you do understand what we're talking about when we say equity, inclusion, and diversity. You just don't think it's your job to do anything about it. It's the ultimate, you do it. Or let's hire the DE&I person to go do it, and then I don't have to do it. So a lot of this is going on, passive awareness, and so we also are helping organizations to build their competencies so that you can co-create work. You don't have to point the finger at the work belonging over here versus over here. There ought to be something about how we strengthen our consciousness about diversity, equity, and inclusion so we're all doing it and we're all thinking it. But passive awareness is a big deal nationally, where we're just sort of pointing fingers at who's supposed to do it because it sure isn't me. And then there's active awareness. I would speculate that there's a lot of that in this room. This is people just like us who actively are doing the work every day. We're advocating for others. We're thinking about policy work and policy changes. We might be deep practitioners in this work. So you'll also have mental models that are like that too. And sometimes we're in rooms where you have a lot of active awareness and we have no tolerance for people that are not in active awareness, and we have to watch out for that too. And the last one I'm going to share with you that we see a little bit less of this than we did in 2020 and 2021, but it's overactive awareness. And it is where you are just hyper-focused on this work in a way that probably is an indicator of you being harmed or being an early adopter of the work. The outcome of this sort of mental model, though, is that you can easily cancel people out. So your tolerance is low. So when you have people that are like passively aware or passively unaware, you have no tolerance for them at all. And so you see lower tolerance levels for people here. You might see cancel culture for people here, where you have no opportunity to give people grace on something. That's a mental model. So what I want you to know about those mental models is your strategies have everything to do with the types of mental models that you're working with, which is why I want you to be thinking about loud versus subtle. What mental models are you noticing, and what mental models might you not be noticing that will help you build your next steps to whatever you're doing? in Colorado. I can't do a scientific analysis of that, but we've got a lot of passive unawareness. And as much as people are saying, move on with all this training stuff, because I know we have a lot of passive unawareness, I want us to pay attention to what that means. I also want you to think about the past election. Sorry, I just got to go there for a minute. The sweep of red across the country in some ways reflects what people don't understand about equity, inclusion, and diversity. The fact that we're saying let's get rid of DE&I and stop DE&Ing tells me that people don't even know what it means. And the people that are saying it are going to be the people most harmed by getting rid of it in their communities. So I want you to just be thinking about how these mental models have everything to do with what you're doing. Okay, I have some final things because I want to leave a few minutes to talk if we can. There's some biases I want you to be thinking about. I want you to watch out for these in the context of how we are doing equity, inclusion, and diversity work. And these are the biases that I'm seeing the most play out in the work in Colorado with clients that I work with. I'm trying to just shape up what I'm seeing most in Colorado. I see a lot of survivorship bias. Survivorship bias is all about you paying attention to your successes and not paying attention to your failures. You don't think there's anything to learn from where you screwed up. And so you just keep going back to let's don't talk about the screw up. Okay, so Colorado has screwed up a lot. I have screwed up a lot. You've screwed up a lot. There are a lot of things about DE&I in particular that we just had to try some things on. Don't lose that. The things that didn't go particularly well, don't lose that. There's the learning opportunity that sits in the middle of that. Survivorship bias will convince you that that's not important. So don't listen to it. I want you to know that's very prominent here. We don't want to talk about what didn't go well. We've erased it. Groupthink bias is another one that's happening in Colorado, where we have thoughts in our head, but our mouths are saying something else. It's like everybody agree, and everybody goes yes, and your brain is going, I hate this. I don't agree, but I'm going to say yes because everybody else is saying yes. There's a lot of groupthink happening. And some of it has to do with the mental models of overactive awareness. We're afraid of people that are in overactive awareness because they seem to be the experts in telling us how you're supposed to do it and how you're not supposed to do it, and it puts us right in groupthink. And so that's when you find out by accident that everybody is not with you. And I want us to be careful about that in our state because I'm biased because I love Colorado. This third one is called decline bias. Decline bias is where you see the old ways of doing things as the right way of doing things, and the new way of doing things as problematic, and so you see change as the culprit. So equity work gets influenced by this. Equity work creates the change in your system and how the systems interact with people and vice versa. If you're in the decline bias, you will see that as a problem. You will see new things, deconstructing, disrupting, dismantling as problematic. And you will compare it to the way it used to be, and that becomes your measurement. There's a lot of decline bias happening in Colorado. Now, one reason it's happening is because we're so intergenerational in our workforces here. You don't see that in every state. But we have 6 or 7 different decades in the workplace at one time. And so some of us really do feel like the good things happened back here. I turned 62 years old yesterday, and I think there's a lot of good stuff that happened way back then. But not everybody does. So decline bias is something that we have to monitor. And here's the last one that I see a lot in Colorado. It's availability bias, and it's split by demographics in some cases in Colorado. An availability bias is just where you get your information from, where your judgment is coming from. And in availability bias, we pull it from what is most accessible to us, what's loudest, what's most vivid, what's more realistic from us. So it doesn't mean you've done a comprehensive analysis of all of the information. You're just pulling from what's readily available for you. And that's where we get a lot of the stereotypes and the rhetoric and the things that we we've been dealing with. So a lot of things to think about there. Those are the bias sets. The last thing I want to share with you is I typically have one strategy that just simplifies all of this, and it's this. I just want to do one thing in the work, and this is what we try to do in the Equity Project. It's just eliminate outsiderness. If you just summarize everything into, is the thing that you're doing creating outsiderness, or is it eliminating outsiderness? That's the key. It is the starting point for everything else that you do. So even when you're talking about health disparities, what about them creates outsiderness? Meaning, do you have an opportunity to co-create something, to bring people that are most disparately impacted by something in? Let that be a guiding question for you. We use that as the basis of what our equity lens is and everything that we do. And I want to just leave you with a quick story, because I can't help myself. I always leave you with a story. Now this one's a real emotional one, because it's a lot going on in this picture. So the lady in the middle is my mother. She's deceased now. She died in 2019. But what a special lady. She worked in the same elementary school as a teacher for 40 years in inner city Atlanta. And she started out in segregation. It was a segregated school. And so you can imagine what that would have been like to have zero resources and be responsible for classrooms of children. This particular picture is special to me because it says so many things. So you see her in a library. Well, the bottom line is the school didn't have a library. It was a school with no library, not a book. So my mother decided every school should have a library. And so she asked the principal for this spare room that was in the school. And the principal said, well, yeah, but what are you going to do with it? And my mother said, I'm going to make a library. And so the principal laughed at her and said, okay, make a library. Wait, I don't know how you're going to make a library. So my mother went on this campaign of collecting books from everywhere, book drives and going to other schools. And she ended up with books. And she did fundraisers, and she ended up with more books. She stole books from our house, and then she ended up with more books. So there she was with this library. Wasn't a comprehensive library, but it at least showed at that time all of the little black kids that didn't have an access to a library. And then one day, this kid shows up, the one in the middle that's not like the others. So that's David. David shows up. David's the first white kid that ever was a part of this school. They'd never seen a white kid before. David had never been to a school that was all black kids and all black teachers. Everybody was having a new experience. So my mother, who back then must have known what I know now about eliminating outsiderness, said, I don't want anybody involved in this to feel outside of. I don't want my black kids to feel outside of because a white kid showed up, and I don't want the white kid that just showed up to feel outside of it either. And so she started doing these really cool things like studying American history and inserting black history in it because it wasn't in it. And sharing with David what black history was because he would have had no visibility to black history as a white kid. And then sharing with the black kids the gaps between what they were learning in traditional American history and their own black history. So I watched her do this sort of gap analysis in everything that she did. But probably the strongest in the end of what I want to say here is the little girl that you see standing outside of the rest of the students, and she's looking at the other students pretty lovingly. This is a 4th grade class. The year before, she was pregnant. She was a pregnant 3rd grader. And so you're looking at a year later, after she gave birth to a child at age 9. This was the biggest thing I think my mother ever had to tackle in her teaching career. I was ready for her to retire in that moment, and she said, I need to see some things through. So that little girl, who didn't have much of a family life, obviously, was under the wings of my mother, and my mother decided to co-create with that little girl the school's first sex education program. She thought, who better to help me create it than a person that was personally impacted by all kinds of things. I would call it the comprehensive sex education curriculum of that time. They did it together. And so what you're actually looking at in this picture are the students in a class that that little girl helped to create. I want to leave you with that because this is what we're talking about now. It was then, but this is what we're talking about now. The eliminating outsiderness, the co-creating things as much as we can, the gap analysis that's going to be required for us to connect the dots for our communities. It's not as obvious anymore. And the elimination of overwhelming groupthink is everything that's a part of this picture. And I think it's everything that's a part of this picture too. And so I just thank you. Thank you for allowing me to just share a little bit about why what you're doing is so important right now, even if it feels like you're under duress in it, that there is the subtlety called hope. It is alive and well. Hope is, kindness is, love is. Don't forget the subtleties. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. And I know I'm probably out of time because I'm so bad at that. It's like things are flashing and I think it means something. But I wanted to, I just wanted to take a minute, if we have a minute, to see if there are any insights, thoughts, or questions. I want to make sure I'm of service to you and anything that's you're curious about. Yes. Hello, my friend.
About that because I see many of the agencies hiring DEI directors just because they're black and Latinos. They think, oh, we're checking the mark, then we're doing our jobs, right? But sometimes those DEI directors have never had that life experience or even work in the hood to understand what those communities need, right? Or they don't even have the personality. Sometimes they don't even want to talk to you. You're like, what the hell? Oh my God, you're the DEI director and you don't want to be out there talking to the community? We have a problem here. So your advice on this, your advice on the overacting awareness, and your advice to those who think just because we're of color, you're the right person to be the DEI director when we have to look above and beyond that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think what you're saying is important. I do have a bias, and I have to say it's a bias. I don't think we did a really good job of responding to communities and organizations in the area of DE&I. I think we did it under a lot of pressure. A lot of moves that we made happened under pressure in 2020. I started the Equity Project in 2016, so I was ahead of everything that happened in 2020. But when I started seeing how we needed DE&I to sit somewhere, we were making commitments and commitment statements. When I saw all of this happening, I trusted about 50% of it. And so we have to tell the truth that some of it was performative for the times. And that happens in every era. I saw that in the civil rights movement too, performative things. I saw it in the diversity movement, performative things. So I'm okay with that might be a reality of the times. What I'm not okay with is putting people in a position to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies on the basis of I don't know what. Because I got to tell you something, just from experience. It's one thing to be totally competent in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but if you don't understand leadership competencies and those kinds of strategies, the things that make up culture, some of the human resources practices, it makes this work a little bit harder because it's not this monolithic kind of thing we're working on. We're working on hearts and minds, behavior change, and systems work all at the same time. And so if we have positioned people well for that work, I'm all for it. But if an organization didn't have the competencies to position people well for that work, I think it's a disservice to everybody. I think it's important that you're raising it. I don't like it that it's just people of color should have more experience. What we're experienced is the oppressions of systems. That's my chief experience. I can tell you all about the oppressions because it's happened since the beginning of time for me. I have more experience than that. But if we don't even know what that is that we're looking for, that's not fair to the person in the role. Thank you for that. What else? Anything else? Any insights, questions, comments? Okay. Yeah.
I'm Diana Pineda from Vuela for Health. Yes. And I want to start to say thank you very much for everyone that is in this room. Because I think that you say, feels the flavor, feels like we want to do something. So that Julissa says sometimes, yes, it's not only about the color. It's not about like we speak Spanish. So we have one person that speaks Spanish, so we don't need you. So we are community workers, promotoras de salud, that working directly in our community, and we want to work with you. We need you, more in this time. I know I hear all the time, like, I don't know what is going to happen these 4 years. We hear that when in our community, and we try. But we know it's a time that we cannot stop. We need to put together and say, yes, it's going to be hard, but we are here. And we are many of us that we can do the difference. So thank you, because I feel really lucky that our community in Colorado is going to survive. Thank you to all of you. So happy to be here, and please don't feel like this is the end. This is a start. We're going to survive. I know the clinics. I know we don't have the budget. I know all the time it was really difficult before COVID. Was more difficult with COVID, and now it's going to be better. One way or another one, I think, is a time to be here and to figure out how we're going to do it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's so true. So true. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.